Hey everyone, Adding Orange here. I just felt like I'd throw this as a little forward before the video started. This project was initially going to be something else, which include being a collaboration with a friend of mine who you should definitely support, because his content is great. However, after about 9 months of waffling and basically doing two separate scripts that we were struggling to figure out how to mash together, and the fact that the game's supposed to be getting a gameplay update this year, I ended up hashing out that original project, and now I've made it into this instead. With that being said, anyone want to see what I can do with a mime and a piece of glass? Balatro is a game where you play cards to score chips to earn cash to buy shit, to play better cards to score more chips to earn more cash to buy even more shit. Remember this, it'll come up later. This game is described as a poker roguelike deck builder. I like to think it's like playing Yahtzee with cards featuring Joker from Persona 5 because he's a wild card and an absolute game changer. But not that kind of wild card, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Released by one guy in the year of gambling 2024, Balatro has gone on to sell over 2 million copies, get ported to all major platforms, including mobile, collaborate with other indie games to get special face card skins, and win the Game Awards for Best Indie Game, Best Debut Indie Game, and Best Mobile Game, winning over half of its nominated categories. The two categories it didn't win, Game Direction and Game of the Year, were claimed by Astrobuy. Still a W in my opinion, since Balatro only didn't claim categories against the Game of the Year. All this to say, this card game, which has taken roughly 100 hours of my life in the 9 months I've had it, is really good and you should play it. However, if there's one thing I've learned about this game, it's that while it's easy to get sucked into, it can get pretty complicated to explain, especially when it comes to understanding certain mechanics and trying to actually complete a run. And since I've barely seen much content in terms of people trying to explain how the game works, I want to analyze and break down the game to teach the prospect jesters how to play the game, win runs, and generally how to not suck at the game, because the house can in fact be outsmarted. My name's Orange, and this is Outsmarting the House. I figure it's best to start out by explaining the general basics of the game before I get into more advanced stuff, so I'll be saving synergies and the like for another time. This game isn't that hard to understand, it's just a little tricky to explain. A Balatro run starts with selecting one of the 15 decks and a stake, aka a difficulty, and then starting you off at ante 1. For the purpose of this first video, I'm going to be referring to the red deck and white stake, because that is the starting deck and starting stake difficulty that the game starts you off with. Not to say that you won't unlock other decks before this, but because red is the starting deck, I'm going to be using that as a point of reference. The aim of the game is to get from the first ante all the way to the 8th. Then beat the boss blind at the end. Yes, this game has a win condition, despite being a high score-based game with supposedly no ending, like Tetris. Although even Tetris had an endpoint, it just required breaking the game. Balatro also has that, but I'm not at that level yet, so that'll be for another time. Each ante is split into 3 blinds, small, big, and boss. Each blind has a minimum number of chips required to be beaten. For the sake of simplicity and poker metaphors, I'll be calling this the buy-in. The base buy-in of the ante is reflected by the small blind. The big blind is 1.5 times the base buy-in, and the boss blind is 2 times unless otherwise stated. When you clear the boss blind of the ante is upped, and so are all the buy-ins. Each blind you participate in is also counted as a round. Upon selecting the first blind, the game will draw 8 cards from your standard deck of 52. All of the suits are in there: heart, diamond, club, and spade. All the ranks too, from aces to kings. The game gives you a certain amount of turns or hands to match or exceed the blind's buy-in. Fail to have the chips and it's game over, sending you back to square one. Roguelike rules. Doesn't matter how far in you are, lose and you start over. So try not to do that. In order to score points, you gotta play poker hands. Depending on how strong the hand is, the amount of chips that will be reaped will vary. Scoring in this game is split into 2 values: chips, which are shown in blue, and mult, which are shown in red. And each type of poker hand has a base value of chips and mult tied to how good it is. The better the hand, the higher those base values are. I'll give a quick rundown of what the hands are and how much they're worth, since I know not everyone's familiar with poker terminology. High card refers to any hand where the cards don't relate to each other, in which only the card with the highest rank is scored. It's equivalent to having no hand and has the smallest base score of 5 times 1. So it doesn't even get a proper multiplier. Pair is pretty self-explanatory. It's when you have 2 cards of the same rank. The base score is 10 chips to 2 mult. 2 pair occurs when you have 2 separate pairs. Given this is also a relatively easy hand to set up, the base score is 20 chips to 2 mult. 3 of a kind marks the start of the mid-tier hands and consists of 3 cards of the same rank. Fittingly, the base score is 30 by 3, and it's the only hand to start with a mult of 3. The next 3 hands all have a mult of 4 due to being more complex and requiring all 5 cards to correspond with one another. A straight or sequence happens when a hand of 5 cards is played in ascending order. Think 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King. The base score is 30 by 4. Flush is arguably the easiest mid-tier hand and is focused on the symbols on the cards rather than the numbers. You get a flush when you play 5 cards of the same suit, so all diamonds or all clubs, for example. 35 by 4 is the starting value of this hand. Full house is the hardest of the mid-tier hands and starts with a 40 by 4 base score, consisting of a 3 of a kind and a pair. 4 of a kind is the first of the high tier hands and is exactly what it says on the sleeve, all 4 of the same rank. The buying price is 60 by 7. Finally, there's the straight flush, which combines both the straight and flush hands. 5 cards of the same suit in ascending sequence, with a base value of 100 chips to 8 mult. This also includes the coveted royal flush, which is just the highest straight flush of 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. The game does recognize the hand as well, but it scores the same as a straight flush. I know I've gone a while without explaining how the cards themselves factor into the score, so I'll keep it brief. Each card adds a number of chips to the base score equal to its rank. 5 adds 5 chips, and 8 adds 8, etc. All the face cards add 10 chips, and aces are worth 11. Total chips are multiplied by the mult, and the result is the amount of chips the hand scores. So at the start of a run, the small blind of ante 1 will have a buy-in of 300. It's more than possible to beat the small blind in a single turn out of the 4 you typically start with. The game actually has a fire effect on the score counter if you play a hand that one-shots the blind. To beat the first blind in 1 turn, you need to play a mult 4 hand that scores at least 75 chips. Depending on the hand you play, the amount of chips the cards have to score will vary. You need 45 for straights, 40 for flushes, and 35 for a full house. But for reference, any straight with a scoring queen, most flushes with 3 or more cards with a rank of 10 or higher, or a full house of 7s and 8s or better will win on turn 1. Upon reaching the buy-in score, the round will end and you'll be given a sum of cash based on the blind, the number of hands you have remaining, and interest, which grants $1 for every 5 in your possession. The small blind rewards $3, big blind rewards 4, and the boss blind reward 5. So to earn the most from each round, it's a good idea to try and win in as few hands as possible while saving cash where you can to build on the interest. Of course, certain circumstances may lead you to play against that framework, but I'll explain that in due time. After cashing out, you'll find yourself in the shop, and this is where things start to get complicated. Remember when I talked about buying shit to play better? Yeah, we're doing that now. The jokers are this game's main modifier mechanic, a system in a roguelike that allows the player to modify their run by improving attributes or otherwise altering certain aspects of the game. For Balatro, this can range from earning chips, earning mults, earning money, multiplying multipliers, granting turns, granting cards, changing jokers, changing poker rules, changing the in-game rules, and whatever the hell this napkin does. Which is whatever any of these clowns do. There are 150 of these stupid clowns in this game, and you will cherish them for dear life, because they make the difference between fortune and getting kicked out of the table. They better be that important. After all, the game is literally just Jester and Latin. They kinda have to be important. However, this is only meant to be part 1, and I don't want to overcomplicate what is already complex and nuanced, so I'm gonna be sticking to common jokers for now. I'll get to the more elaborate ones in due time. So you know how I broke down all that stuff about winning the first blind in 1 hand? Yeah, if you thought that was gonna work all run, that's not happening, Einstein. As I previously mentioned, the buy-ins scale as you progress up the antes, and by ante 2's big blind, the buy-in is hit quadruple digits. Unless you manage to hit 4 good 5-card hands at minimum, it's not gonna be possible to match the blinds within the 4 turns average you're given. Anything past ante 3 is realistically improbable, and ante 4 is literally impossible. So how do you make the scoring consistent enough to get you out of the early game? Antes 1 through 3. Hint hint, it's the clowns. Let's take our buddy Jimbo here for an example. His effect is pretty standard, a +4 mult to your current hand. A nice benefit to be sure, since it gives you more leeway with the hands you're playing. However, adding 4 to the multiplier can only do so much, and there are far more powerful Jimbos to be found. For example, there's the Jolly Joker, one of what I will refer to as the hand-focused jokers, which includes jokers like Zany, Mad, Crazy, and Drool. It provides double the molt the standard Joker did at +8, but it's also the first example of a Joker with a conditional. In this case, Jolly only triggers if the hand that you play contains a pair. That contains part is important, because it means you can trigger Jolly off of any hand with a pair in it, which includes 3 and 4 of a kind, 2 pair, and full houses. In the event that you get a duplicate of a specific card, even a flush has the capacity to trigger this Joker. This is something I see go over a lot of new players' heads, as they think that the description means that they can only play the specific hand that they're being told about, not realizing that they can play better hands and still get the same benefits. The only hands that can't trigger it would be high cards and any hand with a straight, given those only score 1 card at a time and require an ascending sequence respectively. Of course, focusing on specific hands isn't the only condition Jokers work off of. The 4 sinful Jokers are a good example of this. Wrathful, Greedy, Gluttonous, and Lusty are their names. Triggering off of specific suits is their game. The +3 molt they provide may be less than the standard Joker, but it triggers for every card of the matching suit. So at a maximum of 5 cards, that's +15 molt from a flush. 5 better than Drool Joker, which is the hand-focused Joker for flushes. If we want to get even more specific, there are Jokers that play off of specific ranks. The immediate examples I can think of are Even Steven and Odd Todd. Steven grants +4 molds for each even rank card, while Todd grants 30 chips for every odd rank card. Neither of these Jokers can be triggered by the face cards, but Scary Face and Smiley Face exist, granting +30 chips and +5 molt respectively, so they have their own combos. Something I haven't mentioned up until now is that a lot of Jokers focus on either molt or chips. The hand-focused Jokers I mentioned before all have chip variants, and the amount of chips they grant is still rather useful, though in most circumstances, the molt becomes more valuable down the line, which I will elaborate on more in due time. I feel like I'm saying that phrase a lot. Now, some of the rank-specific Jokers just ignore the standard as they grant molt and chips. For example, Walkie Talkie, a personal favorite of mine, grants +4 molt and +10 chips for every 10 or 4 card. Scholar grants 4 molt and 20 chips, but only for aces. Raised Fist is a weird one because it actually adds molt equal to double the lowest ranked card you're still holding. This is where we get into Jokers that don't play off the cards you're playing, but rather other miscellaneous effects that can alter your approach. Banner grants 30 chips for every discard you have remaining, incentivizing playing conservatively with your discards to benefit off of the extra chips. Conversely, Mystic Summit grants 15 molt when you're out of discards, incentivizing deck searching to bring out a good hand, or dumping cards recklessly just to get that 15 molt bonus online. Abstract Joker has a variable amount of molt that depends on how many Jokers you're currently using, granting +3 per Joker. Misprint grants a random molt amount ranging from 0 to 23. Splash is an example of a utility Joker, changing the rules of the game to the player's benefit, in this case making it so that every card played scores, even if it's not part of the hand. Juggler increases the player's hand size, Drunker adds a discard. Some Jokers benefit the player's economy rather than their chip count, such as the Golden Joker, which grants $4 at the end of each round. The To-Do List Joker earns $4 for the player when playing a specific hand, which changes each round. Mail-in Rebate pays $5 for discarding specific ranks that change each round. The Faceless Joker also pays $5 when discarding 3 or more face cards, while Reserve Parky is a 50-50 chance to earn $1 for each held face card, and the Business card is a 50-50 chance to earn $2 for each played card. Egg is an Econ Joker which increases its sell value by $3 at the end of each round. This actually gives us our first example of a Joker combo, because it pairs well with another Joker, Swashbuckler. Swashbuckler does have a requirement before it can even be found in a run, as you need to sell 20 Jokers in total before it unlocks. The way it works is that it grants molts equal to the sell value of all other Jokers. So you can guess what happens when you pair a Joker that improves based on sell value with another Joker that has a scaling sell value. That's not even the only combo that Swashbuckler has, it's just the one that functions off of common Jokers, which I am focusing on in this video. Scaling Jokers are generally the most important ones to look for because they remain useful in later antes because you can build them up over the course of the run. This makes them pretty pivotal in making it out of the early antes and into the later ones. Square Joker and Green Joker are probably the easiest ones to wrap your head around. Square gains +4 chips for each hand played with 4 cards. They don't have to all score, you just need to play 4 cards. And exactly 4 cards. It won't trigger if you play more or less. Using this Joker at the start is a little difficult without other supporting Jokers, just to make sure your scoring doesn't brick from playing relatively low hands, though that can be avoided if you somehow stumble into a 4 of a kind. But when it's going, it can be pretty useful. As for Grimbo here, it gains a molt for each hand you play, but it also reduces that molt count by 1 for using discards. Like Banner, this means using discards actively hinders you, so you effectively have to try and play without them for most of the early game. Although this makes Banner a pretty decent supplement with Green Joker, since both reward you for not discarding. Once again, it's not particularly strong at the start, but the further in you get, the more useful it becomes. This game is full of different Joker synergies that allow you to stay one step ahead of the curve. However, not every step will be flawless, as the game has a skill check for each build. The aforementioned boss blinds. I told you to keep track of this stuff because it's all coming back. I already stated the buy-in of these blinds is twice that of the small blind, but that's not the only wrinkle they toss into the deck. Each boss blind applies some form of negative modifier or rule change that stacks the deck against you. So not only do these have the highest difficulty for scoring, but now the game is actively cheating. For example, the Sinful Jokers I mentioned earlier have direct counters in the head, the window, the club, and the goad. 4 boss blinds that target and punish suit builds by debuffing all cards of the corresponding suit. A debuff card doesn't score any chips, and anything the card would trigger on play would be negated. The rank and suit do still count towards the hand that you're playing, but anything triggered specifically by a debuff card is effectively useless. Another boss blind, the Plant, focuses on a specific rank rather than a suit, debuffing all face cards, so jokers like Scary and Smiley Face would be negated. Another example of a boss blind that debuffs jokers would be the Pillar. However, instead of targeting anything specific that's broad, it targets what you've specifically played already, actively debuffing any cards you've already played during that ante. So if you've been using specific cards for your strategy, the game is going to punish you from using those specific cards. Some of the bosses will outright waste your turns if you don't follow their rules. These ones come in the form of the Psychic, Mouth, and Eye. The Psychic forces you to play 5 cards every time, the Mouth forces you to play the same hand for the entire round, and the Eye does the opposite, banning you from playing any hand more than once. If you try to play a hand that's not allowed, the game will refuse to score it, and you'll have wasted a turn. Basically, it treats those hands like discards. This personally has cost me a run or two, and it's as infuriating as it sounds. Some bosses mess with your cards by drawing them face down, so you can't easily distinguish what the cards are. The Wheel has a 1 in 7 chance for any card to be drawn face down. The House makes your first hand drawn face down, and the Fish draws cards face down after every played hand. The Mark is another boss that targets face cards like the Plant, but simply draws them face down rather than debuffing them. That can still be an issue depending on how you need to play the face cards. There are also 2 exceptions to the rule of boss blinds being worth double the small blind, but you can't actually run into them on the first ante. Some boss blinds are only added to the pool at certain antes. All the face-down bosses I mentioned only show up from Ante 2 onwards, and the Plant only becomes available starting at Ante 4. The Psychic is an Ante 1 boss, but the Mouth starts from Ante 2, and the Eye from Ante 3. Anyway, the 2 bosses with different buy-ins are the Needle and the Wall, both available from Ante 2. The Needle actually has the same buy-in as the Small Blind, but the catch is you only get a single hand to beat it. So if you were struggling with one-shotting the blinds before, this boss forces you to one-shot it or you lose. The Wall, meanwhile, only does one thing: quadruple the buy-in. No major gimmicks, just a 4 times scoring requirement. Fun fact, depending on when you get this boss, you might have to score more than the final boss of Ante 8. If it wasn't clear from my talk of the boss blinds, the house has a lot of ways to capitalize on unsuspecting players, or in less delicate terms, screw the player over. A great build can effectively fall apart if you run into an inconvenient boss blind. And even if we disregard the bosses, the scaling can suffocate a build if a player is unable to find a way to mitigate it. It's more than possible for jokers alone to carry you to the end, and I haven't even gone over some of the strongest jokers yet, just the common ones. There are plenty of other Jimbos to discover, and I encourage you to seek them out before I go telling you about all of them. This first part will certainly help you get a feel for the game, but it doesn't cover everything. That's because neither the game nor I expect you to beat the house on day 1. It takes a little more than some basic clown cards to outsmart the house. After all, that's what the rest of the shop is there for. So next time, I'm going to be going a little deeper into the consumable cards and stuff you can buy in the shop. But until then, I think I'll sit these next few hands out. Let the other players try to get their cards in order. I've got plenty of aces up my sleeve.